Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to our latest Still COVIDing chat. Today, our topic is living in a time of polycrisis, mostly because it's something that I really want to talk about. And I think people in our community are probably a little bit more aware, of course, than your average person about the different kinds of challenges that we face in this day and age. And so one of the ways that makes me feel better is to sort of have other people in our community to talk about what's going on. It makes me feel a little bit less. One of the hardest things for me about living in a time of polycrisis is this sort of dichotomy or dual reality that I have to navigate, where, like, in my day to day and in my regular job, and as I walk along, this one path where there's a bunch of people that are just going on about their lives, and everything's fine, and nothing's the matter. And I have to sort of live in that world sometimes, while in the back of my mind, I'm monitoring like 15 different things. I'm trying to keep track. I'm trying to prepare myself and, my kids or my loved ones. And so I have this like push pull all the time, from the time I wake up in the morning, sort of, until I go to bed at night. What's my priority? What are my priorities for today? And which world am I navigating today? What is, where actually am I? And so one of the ways that it helps me, being an external processor, is to come and talk to you guys. And I'm talking to you guys really as just a member of the community and as a friend. I don't claim to be an expert in the majority of these things that I do want to talk about today. There's certainly even people here on the Zoom that are going to know more than I do about certain topics. Like, I think I mentioned in the description that, like, medical preparation would sort of be my jam, but then there's other areas and things where I'm less knowledgeable. But I just like to think of myself, as a person that's sort of walking through this, and as I'm processing and making these decisions and thinking about these things for my family, maybe there's some of the things that I'm thinking about or doing that might be helpful or applicable to you guys, and we can all sort of, learn from each other. um, I'm sure some of the things that you guys have, thought of or tried or done with respect to these situations are probably things that maybe I hadn't thought about. And so I do really believe this is at the time that we live in. It's really important that we do consider these things as a community and sort of share and help support each other. So that's why I said, all right, we've done some hot topics kinds of discussions before. Well, let's put it out there. Let's talk about the polycrisis. I want to just sort of tell you, the sort of the things that I'm monitoring and looking at, and then from the things that I'm monitoring and looking at, what am I doing? Because for me, I'm a very pragmatic kind of problem solver. I don't want to just bring up all these problems and sort of be like, oh, oh my God, let me bemoan my existence. I want to sort of tell you what, the ways that I've sort of reconciled some things, the things I'm working on, the things I haven't reconciled. And then maybe together, again, we can all help each other with these, ideas, or these times, or at least just acknowledging the kind of reality that we face, and not feeling so alone, or so like, sometimes I look around at all the people around me going about in their lives, and I'm like, okay, well, am I the crazy one? you know, or is it everybody else? Luckily, I'm just egotistical enough to to say, okay, I really do think that I that I am pretty grounded in data and science and reality. But it can be disconcerting, just like it is with the COVID pandemic. There's all of these other areas I think that warrant discussing. And I'll take Q&A, or we'll talk about things again towards the end of my little presentation. Let me just share with you some of my thoughts, and then we can go through and sort of discuss things as a community together. I'm really excited to have a really nice core group of people to think about these things with. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get started. Can everybody see this nice mug? This nice Hallmark mug? It's a mug from this year. If anyone wants to send me one, I would gladly accept it. But this mug again just sort of spoke to me about the dual reality that we live in. We can all sit here and sip our tea and our coffee and say that everything's fine. But for me, there's a process of and a monitoring, a continual ongoing monitoring that I do almost every day as I try to put these things in perspective and sort out where to put my time, my resources, and my energy, and where, where we are kind of moving forward. So the first thing on my list that can be a driver even of some of the other things that I think a lot about, or I do a lot about, a lot of monitoring and sort of reading about is, is climate change. And I personally believe that we have reached some of these tipping points. There's several different sort of tipping points that have come into the public purview and have been in scientist purview for a while. And I think that we're sort of checking them off the list, everything from, the warming of the oceans to the passing of 1.5 degrees Celsius and warming and all of these kind of things. And climate change is important because it can drive some of these other polycrises that we're living through. And so this is one thing that I do think about. This is the amount of energy. Like there is just so much energy right now in the warming of the atmosphere, the heat energy that's happening in this imbalance that we have in our climate right now. And this is, how many Hiroshimas per second that it that somebody calculated that right now for July that we're sort of living towards. And right now we're at, 640,000 Hiroshimas per day, this massive, massive amount of energy right now that is, being created and released into our atmosphere and driving some of this climate change. Our One of our dear mods, Randy, wrote a really great comment about how much energy was involved in Hurricane Helene and the creation and how there's not really enough energy in the world for someone to be able to power that storm, as some of the spin is happening. And so just understanding these massive amounts of energy, understanding like where we are in like what the prior normal was or the prior baselines were, and where we are today. This 1.5 degree warming threshold, was sort of one of those tipping points that we had. And this whole year, basically, we've pretty much been above 1.5, and we're just going up and up in our surface temperatures. Our global sea temperatures, of course, so we're seeing these, massive storms, and we're seeing these shifts in our weather patterns because we're getting hotter, and we're getting hotter, and that's tipping things, and then that throws things off kilter. And then some things like AMOC collapse might make us colder in places that previously weren't cold. And we're just in a big time of flux. And I think we all sort of feel that as well. I mean, I feel like 2020 was, just sort of a year where things tipped, and it started with the pandemic and then sort of kept rolling. And I don't feel like there's the pre and post times. And I don't really feel like we've obviously leveled off to even a new normal from, the pre times. And I sort of think about things in kind of before and after, but I think we have a lot of those things that are coming. So you can see here the sea surface temperatures in 2023 were pretty crazy, and 2024 has been really no different with the global sea surface temperatures. Arizona is a great example. You can see the days reaching at least 110, and how we're just hitting these. We have these averages, and then we have these outliers, and then we have where we are now in terms of the way that the energy is shifting. And that makes me shift and pivot in the way that I look at things, because I think our normal is actually shifting. And then you guys probably saw this that came out, like the carbon sink of the trees and the land are starting to fail. This is also like it's also like an iterative kind of exponential change. Like we've been, looking at models that say, okay, well, in 2050, it used to be like 2100 or 2020, then well, maybe 2050, which still, even though that's not very far away, doesn't seem like it's tomorrow. But what a lot of these models don't take into account is as the dominoes fall, more and more of them fall, and it becomes an exponentially changing system versus a linear kind of change in a system. And so I'm just paying attention and seeing these the where the models might actually be failing us and where things might be accelerating a little bit more quickly than they were. And this becomes relevant to me as I'm looking at climate change and some of the other things that I model, like the different pandemics or health concerns, supply chain and infrastructure, the political stress that we are feeling sort of globally. Climate change drives all of these things, but particularly I had someone ask me a few weeks ago, and I've talked a little bit about before, about how climate change drives pandemics like COVID and H5N1 and other kinds of pandemics. Someone said, well, what does climate change have to do with pandemics? And it has a few things to do with pandemics. First of all, environmental changes will actually, increase the range for certain pathogens. And then they also put evolutionary pressure on pathogens. As things get warmer, the human body is 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit roughly. And there are certain things like Candida auris that used to not be adapted to live in those kind of temperatures. They would live, several degrees cooler. And so our bodies were not really hospitable environments for fungal infections like Candida auris. Then as gradually the temperatures increase and as the pathogens replicate in warmer environments, they become adapted to environments that are closer to our body temperature. And that is one, very plausible reason why things like Candida auris now, which is pretty resistant to a lot of our antifungals, now is better adapted at infecting people. And, we can see this with other pathogens as well. The other thing that we see is we see, the range of certain pathogens increase, like what you used to see around the equator now can, come up into the, higher latitudes because again, we've shifted the growing zones even last year. So the zones for growing food and what seeds could go where, they took a shift for the first time in a long time because of the temperature changes. And so this is only goes to 2019, and it's still going up in the same direction. But this is just the case of tick-borne diseases. And as insect vectors and arthropod vectors like ticks or mosquitoes, come and creep away from climates where there used to be a good winter that would, give us a break from replication, or that would kill them off. Now they can survive all year, and they can survive in a larger range, and they can carry more of these pathogens that are also better adapted to humans as hosts. And so climate change also drives, pathogen evolution. It drives transmission. And then when you think about things like Hurricane Helene or even Milton, pushing people, into, sort of, refugee situations, basically, fleeing climate change and crowding into areas that also, makes more transmission vectors. Migration and crowding will drive transmission. People who are, crowding into a hurricane shelter are not as able to protect themselves from something like COVID or other kinds of transmitted diseases. And so climate change making flooding, making wildfires, making people have to leave their homes. And even just the act of leaving your home and going and staying with other family members, it drives disease transmission vectors. And then as we get to the point where we're having less habitable or less arable land less food. Like if you look over, at what's going on in the Ukraine, which is not necessarily completely climate driven, but the breadbasket sort of Europe. And then as you look at different nutritional stresses and food stresses that start to occur from, basically changes to the way that we can grow food, then those nutritional deficiencies also make people less healthy. People who have more food stress have less resilience in their health, and then they become more susceptible to pathogens as well. So there's interconnectedness between, this drive of climate change and this massive energy and this shift in the weather and the environments, and all of the things that we're starting to see, come out again as pandemics, whether it's COVID, H5N1, Marburg is another one that is, currently on the radar with, the outbreak in Rwanda that's never been there before. And then we thought it might have spread to Germany. Luckily, it didn't. They tested negative. But all of these things are things that, I'm looking at and monitoring and saying, okay, not only what is the weather like here today, what is the weather like in these, global patterns? What is the weather like in the big picture? Who's having to leave their homes today? Where are the wildfires pushing people out? Where are the hurricanes and the flooding pushing people out? Where is this movement happening? And then again, what's happening with the pathogens that are coming. I did want to pause. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about the individual pathogens because we've done that before, and we can certainly do that in the future. But just in terms of monitoring and what I look at, there's a lot of questions right now about how do you tell what's going on, even with COVID, with the lack of testing and all of the situations. And so I'm still like most people right now. I have basically sort of four metrics that I'm looking at to see whether or not we're in like a peak or a valley. Now, our baseline and our lows are definitely a lot higher than it used to be. A lot of times our troughs now are as high as the original spikes. That is just our new normal. It's our new normal unless we come up with some sort of sterilizing vaccine, or unless we come up with some, really effective treatment for COVID-19 sequelae. Then this is basically where we are. But for me, it just makes sense, first of all, to look at the wastewater. We do still have a fair amount of wastewater surveillance. It's not as much as it used to be, but you can still see the trends, especially if you're paying attention. And you can sort of notice when they sort of take some of the stations out of commission, or if something is off. But you can watch the wastewater trends. And I like to do two different sources with the CDC. They have certain levels. My metric for where I like to see everything is below a 3 with the CDC metric, before I say, okay, now we're in a time of lower transmission. And that's one source that I use. And they have all these different kinds of maps, and you can go in, and there's some state and territory data as well. So I tend to go in and look at I'm in a confluence of several different states. So I tend to go and look at sort of my area and the areas immediately around me, and then I look at the region here, and then I look at also BioBot, which I know BioBot's lost some of its data, but it is still monitoring, I think, well enough at a regional level. And my metric for BioBot is 500, and so we don't do a whole lot of difference between what we do in our regular life in terms of like COVID prevention. When in times of high or low, we're sort of pretty much continually mitigated, but we might, at a time of low transmission, say we might downgrade to our N95 masks in lower risk situations instead of our PAPRs or P100s. Like for us, it's still sort of minimal, but there are a few little things that are little tweaks that we make when times are low versus times of high. Another thing is scheduling dentist appointments, trying to catch up on all of our, medical appointments where we may not be able to be mitigated. We try to time them where, about now, and then again, probably about, Aprilish would be the times where we're trying to get into those situations where we know that we're traditionally seeing some dips before we rise back up in our COVID transmission. And this is also something that does give me a little bit of reassurance about with the H5 N1. H5N1 will show up as influenza A in the wastewater. So influenza A, if when influenza A starts to spike in the wastewater, we won't necessarily know whether or not it is, H5N1 or just a typical influenza A strain. But when I start to see a spike in the in the wastewater of influenza A, that's going to give me a little bit more warning to, start paying more attention to what's going on with H5N1. Right now, just in terms of sheer numbers, honestly, we're not doing a whole lot different for H5N1. I'm not like sounding the alarm with my family or my loved ones that we're at a critical point for H5N1 right now. I really think if you're not in contact with people on dairy farms, we don't drink raw milk at my house anyway. We have made the switch to trying to cook our eggs all the way through and making sure that we're not having any kind of medium rare steaks or anything like that. But I'm pretty confident that heating the heating our foods at appropriate temperatures is adequate. I still feel like pasteurization is good enough personally. That's my personal opinion, that the viral fragments detected in pasteurized dairy are not infectious fragments and may even act sort of like passive vaccination, like remember the smallpox and the milkmaids that were, kind of passively inoculated because they were in contact with the viral fragments that weren't necessarily a complete viral load. But once I start seeing the influenza A spike, then I'm going to get real serious about fomite transmission. We at my house let go of fomite transmission and COVID for the most part. I mean, obviously, we're not licking doorknobs or anything, and we sanitize our hands. But COVID being primarily an airborne illness has made us, a little bit less diligent. We're not wiping down groceries at my house anymore, or super overly concerned about COVID as a fomite transmitted disease. But influenza A and H5N1, that's a completely different story. When H5N1 kicks off and we're seeing substantial enough numbers for it to be a problem for people in the general community, at that point, I do feel like we will need to maybe glove up. We'll need to do the disinfection of our groceries again, whether it's through far UV or through wiping them down or whatever it is. We know we have various different processes that the community uses. We will have to be a lot more careful too, especially with the kids and sort of the situations that are okay. Some of the situations that are okay, like for example, my children right now, they're PAPR wearers. And so in their PAPR, they're self-contained in air and pretty protected. But from fomites, they're not. They would still they're still touching things if they can wear their PAPR into a library to grab a library book, but then they're touching the doorknobs and the everything in the library and all of that. And so if H5N1 or when H5N1 kicks, then that's something that will go back to changing a little bit more drastically for my family because of the propensity for the fomite transmission with H5N1. I do find it mildly and only mildly reassuring to look at the CDC H5 bird flu current situation. So they do update this, I believe, every week. We have the number of confirmed cases here in humans at 27 There is one case they're not sure how they got that. So I would say that you can't completely rule out human to human transmission from that one case. And they're not testing enough, just like we don't test enough for COVID. They're not testing enough for H5N1, but they are testing. They have tested, 54,000 specimens. The total number of people that they've monitored after animals is 5,100. I mean, if you think of all the people in the US that are exposed to animals, it's not enough. But at least, I mean, it is something. It's not three or four, and I still think that the wastewater is going to ping before any of these other metrics ping. One thing that's going to ping is the wastewater. The other thing that I'm fairly confident is going to ping are my friends in urgent care are going to start saying, "Oh, we see all these flu cases, and we do know that there's the eye symptoms with H5N1. There's the bleeding eyes, flu cases with bleeding eyes. When those start hitting the urgent cares, then I'm also going to be pretty concerned. But right now, knock on wood, we don't have a lot of influenza A in the wastewater. We don't have a lot of urgent care flu cases with ocular symptoms. So we know it's brewing, but we're still at a slow, low brew level as far as I'm concerned. So for me, that means it's a time to say, sure, to my kids, go on that hayride, because we might not go on that hayride in a month, or we might not be able to do these other things. And that's one of the things that I think is a big takeaway for me when I'm monitoring Polycrisis, is I really think we are still sort of in those before times. We're like in the times where things are starting to come and ramp, and we've seen some really real things, just in the past few years that we wouldn't have thought, or at least I wouldn't personally. I know some people have been in the collapse club for a really long time and maybe a little bit ahead of the curve, but for me, I think I'm relatively new to the collapse club, and I wouldn't have thought, even a few years ago, that some of these things would be happening to me or in my lifetime, or in my children's lifetime. Um, so I do think that we have to balance a healthy dose of awareness and a healthy dose of rational concern and monitoring of the situation, with the acknowledgement that if today is as good as it gets, because it doesn't seem to be that it's going to get a whole lot better, then I better carpe diem and seize the opportunities that I have today that I can do, because those kinds of things I think are what will sustain us when times get worse. So for me, in terms of the bird flu, I'm watching it. I'm aware of it. I'm not, overly concerned that right now it's a threat to me personally. Um, and then I did also, I mentioned the Marburg virus. The Marburg virus is actually even more concerning to me than the H5N1 in terms of if it turns more transmissible, just because the mortality rates are also a lot higher than even the H5N1 mortality rates, which I suspect once H5N1 mutates, it's going to have a lower mortality rate than the previous cases have, because otherwise it won't be readily transmissible. But I think it will have a higher mortality rate than COVID, and we saw what that could do to the community in the world. So I'm not saying it's a non-issue. But I'm watching some sort of these other things, and Marburg, a hemorrhagic fever, is actually really a nasty thing. They thought that it had come into Europe, into Germany, but I believe it ended up being like 13 people that were tested. They were all negative, so that didn't happen. And when I was looking at that, I found this nice little gem. The European Center for Disease and Prevention Control actually has a communicable disease threats report that they issue every week. And so now there's another another little thing to monitor. This is, this week's report. There is some polio. This is the vaccine-derived polio from the oral vaccine that has popped up in a few places in Europe right now. So they're monitoring the polio cases, as well as H5N1, particularly here in the US, the Marburg disease. We're still looking at monkeypox as the clade 1 and clade 2 sort of is settling around, and then there's a little bit of dengue and West Nile and stuff that we're seeing as well. So finding summaries from different places because we are globally connected now. I can't just look at what's happening in, my little area of the country. I have to sort of see what's coming. And we learned that with the COVID waves and the different variants and sort of how they would, hit Europe and then come here on the coast and come inward and all of that. And so whenever I find something like this, I'm like, okay, I'm going to add that to my sort of reports that I aggregate as I go along and monitor these things. And so that's my little spiel right now on the pandemics and climate crisis and what I'm looking at. And then that also plays into, supply chain issues, because one of the things I think as these polycrisis ramp, one of the biggest like personal threats to all of us, like just your, common ordinary Janes, Joes, and Martys are going to be supply chain disruptions and disruptions to the way that we're accustomed to live. And let me tell you guys, especially here in the US, we are spoiled rotten. We are absolutely used to turning on the tap and having clean drinking water. We are absolutely used to flicking on the lights and having electricity. We are absolutely used to going to the grocery store and being able to find the things that we need. And I think that that's going to change in substantial ways for all of us as we walk through these different things. And so, starting with COVID and the shipping ports being closed and all of those things that happened. I mean, the great toilet paper crisis that wasn't, all of those things sort of taught us to keep an eye on our supply chains and the things that are happening and coming. And so, when the shipping strike hit, a bunch of us were already watching and knew sort of what those impacts might be, and we're able to sort of try to mitigate that for ourselves and our families and our businesses and our loved ones, and trying to keep an eye on things. And so, as we take more hits from climate change, as we take more hits from the worker crisis and long COVID and the pandemic issues happening, we're going to see more hits to our supply chain and our infrastructure, which is why when we get to what we can do, building some resiliency in that for each of us, individually just helps take the pressure valve off the system. And then that way, if we're better positioned, we can help our neighbor who might not be, or if our neighbor's better positioned and we need help, then we can be helped. So some examples of that right now, everyone probably is aware that there's likely to be a semiconductor shortage pretty soon. There are some stock, but the mine that mines the pure quartz in semiconductors for most of the world is underwater from Saline in North Carolina. And so our electronics are likely to start being affected. The availability of manufacture of electronics and everything from your cell phones to your laptops to cars depends on this certain quartz mine that's in North Carolina underwater right now. And of course, they're saying that, everyone's trying to come and, help get that back up to speed. But the delays that have already happened since Helene hit are already going to be seen. It's sort of like the shipping strike only was what were they down like not a week about, but it's going to cause at least 2 to 3 months of delays for certain commodities that sat there because of the domino effect of just being shut down. It was like every day was like 5 days of delay in certain sectors. And so be aware of those kind of things. If you or your loved one really wants that, latest cell phone model and you were planning on getting it for Christmas, you might want to go ahead and pull the trigger and then put it away versus wait a couple of months where, we may not have as much availability. And that's really, I mean, semiconductors and for some things like a cell phone may or may not really be a necessity. But for other things like, there's semiconductors in medical equipment and other kinds of things that we really do need, that's going to have trickle down effects down the road. And probably everyone is also aware right now we're in a saline shortage. 80% of the saline that was produced in the U.S. was, is then from the Baxter plant again that was flooded in North Carolina. I'm sorry, it was 60% from the Baxter plant. There was another issue with it, with another 25 at another plant, that it wasn't the hurricane, it was I can't remember right now, but it was a supply issue. So elective procedures are being canceled across the U.S. Because there's not enough saline hospitals are rationing, and the government has finally invoked a wartime power to expedite like importation of saline and to be able to have the supply recover. And sometimes that's feasible and sometimes it's not. We saw during COVID that, you know, there were certain things that, you know, the government could and was willing to do to sort of speed up certain shortages. And then there was other things when it's a worldwide issue that just couldn't happen. It's sort of like what was it? Kirk was the first actual like hurricane to cross the Atlantic from the Gulf and come all the way over into Europe. And so when we start to see more of those anomalies, when we have different storms and flooding happening in different places, then we may, you know, the globally the system may not be able to recover as well. So um and then the infrastructure too. Infrastructure, you know, we what we're learning as we watch the events in North Carolina play out is that if, you know, if we had a flood like the one that happened in North Carolina happen in two places at once, we are woefully and inadequately prepared, even as a society, to come in. Even what people there are still facing today, and what the response is right now, there we're just not prepared for these scales of disasters. And so they're planning on opening the Blue Ridge Parkway, parts of the Blue Ridge Parkway again in September of 2025. You know, some people there are still without potable water. There's still people without electricity, and it's right here in, you know, first world United States. And so this is something again new for us, and something that was very interesting and made me stop and think was, you know, I try to have these discussions with my kids just again to promote awareness. And I was talking to my 18-year-old about these things that were going on, and he was like, Mom, first of all, this has been happening all over the world for a really long time, and just in the US, it's new to us because we don't think it happens to us. But second of all, my generation is sort of habituated, like we've sort of grown up, you know, during the pandemic and watching these multi-crises unfold. And so unfortunately, what to you seems shocking to us is just another day. And I really had to sort of sit with that, especially, you know, the othering, you know, of like this is happening somewhere else. It's not happening to me until it does. I read something the other day about how we'll watch it on our cell phones until our cell phones become the ones recording it and then run out of battery. And so like sitting around and thinking about those things are, you know, can be a little bit I don't know, it just makes me a little bit introspective, makes me think about how I'm framing, you know, reality in the world as we go through these things. And so, infrastructure is one thing, manufacturing is another. We are now a society, an on-demand society. We are not self-sufficient, and I think we're going to have to learn to go back. We've seen that everything from like, you know, the formula recalls, which were a couple of years ago. We do have the listeria recall now. I do see the question about in the chat about how do we know it's listeria and not H5N1. I am fairly confident we can tell the difference between a bacteria and a virus when we're looking at certain things. And I'm not a big enough conspiracy theorist to think that they're going to lie and tell us that H5N1 is listeria, because there's plenty of competent scientists eventually probably that would figure that out and probably call them out on it. So, but things like that, you know, it takes people to monitor water quality. It takes people to monitor food chain quality. It takes people to ensure the certain level of things that we're used to. And when that infrastructure breaks down, then you know, we get things like this. And I don't know if you guys can see this or not, but this was actually coming out of my faucet in a major city in the US just a few months ago. And it came out of my faucet for a few days. And I was like, what do you mean? I was calling, they were repairing some roads. They were repairing some pipes in the roads, and they're replacing the gas lines, and they kept hitting the water lines, and then they would flood the water lines with crap, and then they would fix it and then just leave it. And like there was no one coming to test to see if the supply was safe again. They were just like, oh, we got all this sediment and sludge and runoff from the pavement, and you know, the dog doing everything all in your water, and then, but don't worry now, just let it run till it's not brown anymore, and then it'll be safe for you to drink. And that did give me pause as to how secure I felt drinking water from that city supply, but there was really nothing to do about it. I mean, actually, I called the health department, made them come to my house and test it from my faucet before I would let us drink it. And I did have enough sort of water on hand to be able to deal with the that until they got there, which I thought they should have gotten there more quickly. It took them like 5 or 6 days to come out and actually do it. But um, things like this, are they're just going to happen more and more often, and we're going to have, less competent people, I think, to deal with it. We all know the cognitive hit that we're taking societally from COVID, and so we're just going to have to start being more self-resilient. We're going to have to go back to, instead of depending on the grocery stores and depending on, our government to take care of us and all of those kind of things. I mean, I'm not saying we should completely abdicate all expectation until we can abdicate taxes, but we're going to have to depend on ourselves and our communities a little bit more than we're used to take care of ourselves as we confront these polycrises. And so this is the point where I go, okay, now I've, looked at all of these problems and I'm sufficiently in a down mood. What can I do? What can I do? And I haven't even touched, and I won't go there very much, but the political stress is another thing that I keep an eye on. And not just the political problems that we're having here in the US. We know we have a very contentious political climate right now. All of us, I'm sure, are a little bit on edge. What's going to happen with the election? What's going to happen with the inauguration? We're coming into this tumultuous time where we're going to have the confluence of the election along with cold and flu season. And so that's a little bit unnerving, but we also have these problems all over the world, right? We have the Gaza in the Middle East, we have the Ukraine, we have this tension with China that's happening. So that's another thing that I'm monitoring. And then the other thing that I do also look at quite regularly are the cyber attacks, and how we keep having different sectors go down. We had Bank of America at one point, we had the T-Mobile line at one point. I saw that the Comcast in wide sections of Colorado was down the other day, and we've had healthcare systems change. Healthcare went on for months and months, and so we have these, politically motivated attacks. We have these cyber attacks. All as we're having these infrastructure problems, the supply chain problems, the human resources kind of problems, the cognitive decline from COVID, all of the pandemics, the climate change, and the disasters. So having dumped all of that on everybody and everybody's psyche, what do we do? And some of this, like I said, I know that there are some people on here that are way more self-sufficient than I could even fathom being, and this might be sort of basic, but the things that I wanted to touch on are, first of all, the law of threes, right? This really helped me when I started looking at ways to prepare myself and my family. And this is, can you be self-sufficient for 3 days? Could you be safe wherever you are? Food, water, shelter, whether it's, in your house or if you're displaced, and you have to leave for 3 days. Can you just get, a bag prepared? Can you get, enough of whatever it is you would need to live comfortably for 3 days together? Then once you have 3 days, can you get 3 weeks? And then sort of the big goal in my head, I know there are people who have like laid in supplies like, the Latter-day Saints church where they have years. I don't really think that's ever going to be super attainable for me. But, for me, sort of the big goal in my head is 3 months. I do not have 3 months of self-sufficiency built into my house yet. I'm still at the 3 weeks kind of let's make sure stage. But, I think breaking it down into saying, okay, let's do 3 days first. Let's get that taken care of. Then let's try for 3 weeks. And 3 weeks is sort of like what we're seeing in North Carolina, what we've seen with other hurricane situations, flooding. I mean, wildfires can either wipe you out sort of indefinitely, or you might be able to come back. But you're a lot better positioned if you have the ability to take care of yourself for 3 weeks. And again, our changing climate and environment means that, well, I used to think, well, I'll have 3 weeks of supplies all sitting in my house. Well, now my house might be wiped out with a flood, or my house might be wiped out with a wildfire, or my house might not be where I can be. So I have to sort of shift and think, how would I take care of myself for 3 weeks? both in, sheltering in place or, leaving where I am. And then again, the whole 3 month plan. So that's the first thing, is just to try to not be overwhelmed, and think of the law of threes and just try for 3 days. That was really helpful to me. And then the next thing that was really helpful to me was to think about things that, what can I do that doesn't cost much money, right? Because we all have limited resources, some of us more than others. And so as I'm thinking about the laws of threes, I like to break things into really bite-sized chunks. Otherwise, I look at the whole big picture and I want it all to be done, and I get overwhelmed, and then I just go and read some fiction because I can't deal with what it needs to be. So, what are some of the things that don't cost money or don't cost much money to do that can help you long term with resilience in the face of polycrisis? And so, for me, one of those things was awareness, right? It was knowing that I am paying attention. And so I'm not going to, I mean, maybe that's, not going to be the complete answer for me, but at least I'm not going to be caught completely unawares like some other people might be who are not paying attention to what's happening. And that does allow me to be able to prepare and anticipate some of the things that maybe might not, other people might not anticipate. So, like one of those things for me was I haven't upgraded my radar weather app on my phone, and it gives me little alerts about weather changes and those kind of things. And so I'm aware of what's happening, around me that way. Awareness, and like I said, some of those, conglomerating sites that are monitoring disease, or that are monitoring, in different parts of the world, just knowing what's going on in manageable chunks. Again, I don't think like sitting on news sites or scouring the web, 24/7 is really healthy or even necessary, but just having sort of a systematic approach to, okay, at least once a week that I'm pulling all the data in, I'm getting an assessment of where we are. And then, in real time, I'm looking at things like, like weather and things that are happening. And awareness doesn't cost me anything but what I pay on my electric bill and my uh, and for my internet, right? Um, and then the second thing that I think about beyond awareness, it's knowledge and skills, right? And so one of the things that as I become more sort of, I call it sort of collapsed aware, or, aware of these polycrises, is to pivot to trying to learn some of the things that I don't know, to pivot to trying to learn, embarrassingly, I didn't know where the whole breaker box was in my house to turn it off, or I didn't know where. Now I'm in a house where there's a well. Where was the well? I didn't know certain things, certain skills. We practice making fires, like we go camping now and make sure that we can use a flint and steel instead of a match, or just, picking up certain skills that may be useful. I mean, like I said, sort of my jam is medical prep, so I'll suture just fine, but some of the things that I don't know, that, might come in handy. And it also helped me sort of pivot my kids, like the way that I am, we homeschool, for a variety of reasons, but, mostly right now at this point because of the pandemic and not being able to be safely in the schooling situation. But, pivoted our curriculum for my youngest that's still in the throes of, elementary school, to more experiential based, to more, skills based curriculum versus, maybe the more kind of purely academic stuff that we would do earlier. So that's another thing. Knowledge, skills. How do we build that? Flexible mindset, right? Flexible mindset. And the pandemic has taught us that a lot. Now we go, we might go places, and we might be, may say we're going to visit a park, and we go and look and it's super crowded. Well, we pivot and go somewhere else, right? Like the pandemic taught us that we have to be able to pivot and change. And as we see these different polycrises happening, we also have to learn how to pivot and change. And sometimes, for some of us, that's easier than others. And being creative thinkers and fostering those creative thinking skills are another thing that doesn't cost us a lot of extra money. Being organized, okay? I cannot tell you how many times I bought some specific tool and then stuck it somewhere for safekeeping, and then all of a sudden, for safekeeping, I don't know it is, and then I need it, and I'm like, oh man, that I don't want that to happen to me in a time where I'm already stressed or having crisis. So just getting a little bit more organized in a step-by-step fashion. I was going to show you that, I used to not know how many batteries we had in our house, and now I have my nifty battery organizer. So I never have to wonder, do I have double A's? Do I have triple A's? Like just little things like this. And this was not expensive. This was less than $20 to get a battery organizer. So I know what I have and where I have it. And I'm not perfect at this, especially I was thinking this weekend, I definitely need inventory on some of my medical stuff, because it gets away from us as we add and rotate. But being organized, it takes time, it takes attention and focus, but it doesn't take a lot of extra money. Dietary modification. What do you eat when you don't have your, easy access to your cooking stove or your microwave? What kind of foods can you eat? And can you start sort of trying things, or especially if you have family members that are on special diets or picky eaters or food restricted, can you start working that into the day to day somehow, doing and trying some of those dietary shifts versus eating the same thing every day or every week that may or may not be available to you during a time of scarcity or crisis. And so shifting those kinds of things around are just subtle changes that I've tried to make and implement for my family to get people used to how we might have to eat during a time of shortage. And we don't do that every meal, but every week trying to get them to try something different, or trying to get them to make try something that's prepared a little bit differently in a way that we might prepare it if we say didn't have electricity or didn't have access to some of the things that we have access to right now. Fitness, personal fitness, you can do very, very cheaply. It's something that is high on my list of what I want to really work on and that I really sort of suck at doing. But, having an exercise routine, getting out there, just walking, biking, running, what if, there's a gasoline shortage and you need to walk to the pharmacy to pick up your medication, or, can you make it from point A to point B to the best of your ability? And there are a lot of us that have health issues and health sequelae, but how will we deal with those in times of crisis? And even those of us who do have health problems, we can still be the healthiest version of ourselves that we can be. And that's something that, we can do without spending a lot of money. Prescription refills. Switch your prescription refills from 30 to 90-day supply. It doesn't cost usually anymore. Matter of fact, sometimes you get a discount from your insurances from getting that 90-day supply. And that's a way to get ahead on, during a time of shortage, that on the things that you might need. So making, and that doesn't cost, like I said, normally doesn't cost any extra to go ahead and get your prescriptions filled in 3-month increments instead of 1-month increments. And then you can have, there's several months where you'll have a little bit of extra on board. That's something that's easy to do. And then building community around us. This is, I think, one of the hardest things for me since COVID, right? Because we're protecting ourselves, we're isolating, and so it's not the same way that I used to build community. I used to just go knock on my neighbor's door with a plate full of cookies and say, "Hey, I'm Kara. Nice to meet you. Tell me about yourself," et cetera, et cetera. And now I'm not as willing to go out. And if I do go, I have my mask or my paper on, and I have sort of perfected the greetings, Earthling. I come in peace, but not everybody really wants to see me on their doorstep now, because they're like, who's this weirdo and what she's doing? What is she doing? And so consciously finding ways to reach out and build community is something that can be challenging for those of us in the COVIDing space, but also will be really, really necessary during times of shortage or crisis. And what I might be able to help somebody with, or what my skill might be exactly what they lack, and they may know how to do what I lack, and we'll all need that kind of local infrastructure to depend on, because we won't be able to do it alone if we, if our infrastructure and our systems collapse. And so trying to figure out how do I connect with my neighbors? How do I connect with people around me? Can I find other members of the coveting community that are close to me? Maybe they're not exactly my age or my demographic or whatever, but can I reach out and try to form some of those relationships? Do I even have a plan? You know, if I have to leave my home, where am I going? And is there someone in my community that I can team up with and sort of be that refuge for? Those are the things that really you can do with a minimal amount of, investment, monetary investment. It does take time, it does take forethought, and so that's, one of the places to start. And then I'll just briefly go over a few things that I've done that have cost a little bit of money, that I have made some investments in, that also I feel like are important. One of the things is, paper book knowledge, right? If the internet is down, this is my where there is no dentist, there's where there is no doctor. I've invested in some like edible plant guides. I have the Booner books for herbal antibiotics and antivirals. I mean, I'm not thinking that I'm going to walk out there and forage enough to eat. Don't get me wrong. But I'm just saying, like, knowledge and making sure that the library that you have tangibly might come in handy, and that's one of the things that I've invested in. And then clean air, Palestine and the wildfires taught me that, I have my 3M P100 Secure Click, which is my favorite elastomeric that I can wear around for COVID. But I can, get these chemical filtering cartridges, and then it will protect me against, chemical train derailment, or the Atlanta, chemical chlorine plant. And so making sure we have access to clean air has to be a priority. And of course, it does cost a little bit of money to make sure that we have the proper mask and cartridges. But that's one thing. I mean, if you can't breathe, then you can't really live. And I was happy to find out that my temp top CO2 monitor that I have, during the wildfires a couple of years ago when they were so bad, it has a PM 2.5. And I would have probably not realized that the old house that I lived in that was super drafty actually had hazardous levels of, PM 2.5 and PM 10 if I hadn't had this monitor for COVID to look at the CO2 levels. I wasn't intentionally trying to look at the other things. I was trying to make sure that my ventilation was adequate in my house. But when the wildfire smoke came around and I knew I needed to wear protection outside, I actually learned that we had to wear protection inside our house for a few weeks. We had to have, rooms shut up with air filters going and all of that to get the particulate level down to a healthy level for our lungs. So having access to monitor that is another something that was important to me. Air, water, the faucet that I showed you, um, pouring sort of mud out of it, led me to just simply make sure that I have some of these on hand with this little $10 pump that makes it easy to access water. And so, it's sort of the colloquial wisdom is a gallon a person a day. So when I buy groceries, these are pretty cheap at my local grocery store, and I just usually throw an extra one of these in the cart so that when I get my grocery delivery, I have an extra water supply for my family, because I was super excited to find out that we were on a well out here, and then realized that when we lose electricity, there's no pump to the well, and so we have no access to water now when we lose electricity, which is still to me a little bit preferable to depending on the kind of water supply that we had in the city, but it's a whole nother problem in and of its own. So clean air, clean water, that's an easy solution. We probably all know about like the little Sawyer kits that we're seeing now, that are coming in so handy in North Carolina. Everything to the new Carapod. Isn't that funny? It's a Carapod. It'll pull water out of the air, and I think it makes up to 3 liters, I believe it is, a day of water, just from air condensate. It's a little bit more expensive, but it's actually out on the market now. So there's options for a water as well. Another thing that was really important to me was communication if the cellular network was down. And I looked into ham radios, and I'm sorry, it's a learning curve, and it's more time and energy than I could invest in actually learning how to ham someday. I really hope that I will be able to do that. But the cheapest, easiest thing that I could find were these little Garmin Mini InReach satellite text phones. You can't make a phone call, but you can text. And so I was able to make sure that my adult child who doesn't live with me has one. And then we have one that lives in my bag. And then when my other big kids go out, they take one with them. And if the cell networks are down, it's a satellite, little mini satellite phone that you can text each other in case of an emergency. And so being able to talk to my kids was high on my list of priority. And then if there's things like backup power and backup first aid and medical supplies that we can certainly talk about in the future, but we're sort of coming up on how long you guys probably want to listen to me talk. So I'm going to go ahead and not share some of my other little gadgety things that I have unless you actually really want to see them. And I'm going to start looking at the chat and see maybe what are some of your questions or your comments about some of the things that I have. So I really hope the takeaway message today is that we can all get 3 days together. I know we can do it. It may take some time. We can all get 3 days together and then, aim for 3 weeks to be more resilient. We can do the things that, only require an investment of, time and energy, and then do the things look gradually that require more capital to put into place. And then we can all grow together in community so that when we do get hit with these polycrisis things, we know who we're calling up to ask, hey, how do I find that breaker box in my house? Or where's my water shut off? Or oh no, I can't get to the doctor and this is going on. Can you help me? How are some ways that I might be able to handle the situation that I'm in? So all right. I'm gonna just go through the chat now and see. You guys have been typing in here. Um, Human body temperature is also dropping, possibly because of endocrine disruptors. That makes sense. Don't even get me started on microplastics. COVID-19 was good prep for H5N1. We know how to deal with airborne virus. 100% agree. I'm way less worried about H5N1 than I would have been in 2020 because we've been through COVID. And so I'm feeling better on that. Can you add links to these report sites in the notes? I can. I can put links to any of the sites. I can also put links to the articles, and I can put links to the gadgety things too. Christina is graciously taking notes for us as fast as I've been talking, and I can make sure that I'll go into her document and get links for anybody who. There she is. Hey, Christina. I'll get links for any of the things that people are interested in. Randy doesn't think the quartz mine is going to immediately impact chip fabs. No, Randy, I said in a few months it's going to impact chip fabs, but we can talk about that later on. DPA is being used for IV. Yep, they're actually they are doing all sorts of workaround for the saline crisis. Helene victims are on day 23 with no boil water orders. Exactly. So can you imagine being on day 23 without any water or even, the ability to flush toilets is a big one. I'll show you a real easy toilet prep this is a toilet seat. It sits right on top of a 5-gallon bucket. So all you need is a 5-gallon bucket and a trash bag, and then maybe a little bit of kitty litter or some sawdust or something in the bottom. And that makes a real nice little toilet that you can make your waste manageable when you don't have running water as an option. And actually, the pandemic taught us about portable toilets because we moved across the country at the end of 2020 and we weren't going into public bathrooms. And so we had sort of a similar, we didn't have this. This actually probably would have been easier. We had a camping toilet that we actually had to clean out and wash, which I really like the trash bags and the kitty litter or sawdust better. I think it's cheaper and it's easier to deal with. So yeah, that's 3 weeks, right? That's over 3 weeks with no water or boil water orders. So preppers are us. Yeah, pretty much. polio in Gaza. Hospitals are frequent targets for ransomware. Exactly. Wired magazine, good info on the kinds of things, especially tech stuff. Thank you very much. Gas turnoff may be more important than electric. That's true. We know that from like earthquakes, right? We don't want to be sparking the gas. For prescriptions, call your insurer and ask how sure you can refill the drug from any 75% of the bottle. Yeah, my prescriptions are time-based. I think I can get them 10 days before the refill is actually due. So let's see. We need to do a brainstorm of long-lasting, no-cook, nutrient-dense prep foods. Definitely. I think if we as a community want to come together and do some of these brainstorms and go more in depth to like alternate power sources, go more in depth to, planning for food, planning for water, et cetera, that's definitely something that we can do periodically and try to um, bounce ideas off of each other. You guys have probably seen me before, maybe talk about I'll show you pictures, my little hydroponic station, where I think I could grow enough lettuce for salads. That's about it. But I thought it was a good place to start and actually growing something, right? Now there's learning how to grow something, and then there's learn how to grow something at a scale where it's really going to help you during a food shortage crisis. But hydroponics are one thing and one way that we can go and talk about it. I want to encourage my neighbors, but I don't want them to assume I'm a prepper with extra food, water, and fuel. How do I encourage them without them relying on me? That is a great question. And I feel similarly that I don't want, to advertise that I might have some extra, but at the same time, I do want it to encourage the people that I know to put things together. And so I guess it's really an individual call. Personal protection is another individual call that might be something that, we might talk about in smaller group forums or whatever. But I think we do have to be discreet, but at the same time, there's lots of opportunities now with everything that's going on in the world to sort of talk about our musings and our worry in a more general sense. Like, hey, I was really watching what was going on in North Carolina, and that really, I realized we're on a floodplain. And have you thought about what we might do in that situation? And just sort of bringing that kind of awareness versus letting them know, hey, I'm all prepared. Right. We can sort of generally talk about things with our neighbors. Can you put water filtration device link in the chat? Sure. And there's several different kinds, but I like Sawyer's because they're the ones that are purported to get down to the smallest micron level for most of the pathogens that would be living in water versus some of the other ones might not get they don't go quite as low. Those things are very big, the things that pull water out of the air. Actually, no, they're not anymore. They used to be, but now there's something. Let me see if I can pull it up for you. And it's called a carapod, and it's about the size of a coffee maker. And so they used to be big, but now I was actually let me see if I can find it here on the Kickstarter. They're actually not even this big anymore. Let me see if I can pull out of, but they have some now. It's about the size of a coffee maker, and it can do, I think it's 2 or 3 liters a day. I just got here we go. I'll show you what it looks like. I found it. So you see here, it's about this size. It's not like huge anymore. And they got a Kickstarter grant, and now they have these little machines that they have pods of them. You can even make coffee from them. They're about $300 right now is what they're running. And they will pull the water out of the air. So theoretically, they're 3.2 liters per day you can use to drink or make coffee with, and it is free of contaminants. They say that the way that they process it even makes it free of microplastics and everything else. So they're not huge anymore like they used to be. We love gadgets with links. Okay, cool. What is the name of the condensate pitcher again? Oh, I just showed you. It's called Carapod. And I can get links in the chat too. There's a kids ham radio class being offered in the Northeast. That's great. It's not even so much the time and stuff for the class. It's that I realized that by the time I buy all the like the pieces and then the antennas and like all of the stuff that I needed, it was going to be more expensive than getting one of these little sat phones. And then I also have to do the class and the license and all of that. So for me, the money, this little sat phone here is again a couple $100. And so for a couple $100, I could have a pretty reliable way. I mean, this wouldn't work in like an EMP situation, like with a big solar flare or with some sort of nuclear detonation, that, you know, something that knocked the satellites out. But for something like flooding or wildfires or cell surface, I mean, cell tower overload, like what happened after 9/11, those kind of things, this will work just fine. And it was cheaper and easier than a ham setup for me. I would like to do that someday when I have less demands on my time. But right now, it's not a great option. I just don't have time to learn how to use it. How do we get links to past event notes? Usually they're posted under the video. So we do have a YouTube channel now where we are trying to get all of our videos in one place. So we have a Still COVIDing YouTube channel. It would be great if you guys would go in and subscribe to it. But we're trying to cultivate the playlist here. We don't have everything pulled over yet, but we post the videos here for people to watch. And then we also post them in the groups and in the event group where the video link is posted. Christina also posts the notes so that you can access the notes after each chat. BOS odor blocking bags are miraculous and they're designed for diapers. Yep, that's perfect. There are 3 levels of ham. You should be able to get some fairly affordable hand setups of the lowest license. ARL.com is the place to learn more. Yeah, like I said, someday I'll be a ham. Today I'm just a satellite texter. We can create share docs as well. Okay, I used to live in Tornado Alley. Large water containers are convenient, but not the best in emergency. Yeah, because you can lose your water. I learned to have a pallet of little bottles sealed for easy portability. But if something heavy lands on it, you can lose all the water. Right, exactly. So like right now for me, I have sort of a combo setup where, like I said, I have these, you know, big guys with my little, you know, $10 pump thing. And then we also have, like I said, some of the filters. There's different setups on the Sawyer filters. And they do a lot of work with drinking water in third world countries. There's some now that you can actually just plug into your faucet if your faucet's not potable. They're like bigger ones that you can use for a community if the community's water goes down. And so, you know, there's water storage and then there's, you know, the water filtration setup. And I think it's probably good to have a combo of sort of both sets up there. YouTube has plenty lessons learned videos. Absolutely. I've been doing a lot of that lately. My first cousin had a generator in North Carolina and helped nearby neighbors because of this. No issue there, safety in numbers. Yeah, this is true too. You know, if you can help your neighbors, if you do have enough, having more people in your group helps not only for protection, but also for, like I said, for skills. So definitely developing community is the model that we want to take care of. Now, there is a lot also out there on how to secure your generator because there have been situations where the generator is loud and noisy and then it walks off in the middle of the night and somebody else has a generator. So you have to, again, sort of balance those concerns, safety versus, you know, and safety in numbers versus who knows that you have your generator. The rule of threes for basic survival. Yes, 3 minutes without oxygen, 3 hours without shelter, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food. Another rule of threes. Yep. Cooled air things out of the water. Very cool. Yep, the small ones are cool. They do require electricity. Now, again, we could probably have a whole setup on alternate electricity. I mean, there's a whole lot of, you know, ways out there now, especially solar setups. You know, my family has lugged this little Jackery around now for a couple of years. We used it for our portable COVID testing first with Q, then with Metrics, now with Plus Life, and then my kids found out it would charge all of their devices and their phones, and it'll run a laptop and all that kind of stuff. So even just a little guy like this has been super, super helpful for us. And it has solar panels that will charge it. It also will charge off of the car, and then it'll charge off of the wall port. And so having something versatile like this, I think is a good idea. And then there are the bigger setups. There's the bigger, whether it's a gas powered setup or some of the eco batteries that again will charge from solar. There's all sorts of portable power ways, depending on what you need to, what you need to use them for. A lot of people first concern, of course, is any medicine that needs to be kept cool. Like my son's monoclonal migraine shots have to be refrigerated or they'll go bad. And so we have a little bitty free refrigerator that will run off of even this little guy for a while to keep his migraine meds cold. But people who, diabetics who need insulin and people who have other climate controlled medicines, that's probably first concern. And then second concern, of course, is refrigeration for your food, right? If you have a chest freezer, do you have a setup that can keep the freezer cool for a while, or at least until you figure out, sort of what you're doing otherwise. So Sawyer is nice, but it doesn't filter out viruses like norovirus. I think now they're saying at point 0.2 microns they are getting viruses. I could be wrong. I'll have to look it up, but I think that is one advantage to the Sawyers is they are claiming now that they finally got their filtration low enough for viruses. Will you post the Zoom chat? We can do that. There's a government-sponsored group for neighborhoods to have emergency response. Yeah, there's CERT classes and CERT groups in every area. CERT, I believe, is what they're called. You can just Google your, CERT in your county, and then it'll pop up. And they do have periodic trainings. Now, are their trainings COVID safe? Of course, they're not. So you'll have to need to make sure you're in, PPE, and then you'll get lots of questions about that. But they do have, and to be able to go into areas when a disaster hits, they will take you with CERT training before they'll just take, a common person off the street who comes and says, I want to help. Blackout curtains, people do not handle emergencies well. Buddy in Houston had solar when power went out, pipes froze. He had neighbors threatening him for not giving them all the power. He had no problem warming people, letting them cook and charge devices. HOA sued him a few months later. He now has Tesla roof and blackout curtains. Again, that's another situation too, where like knowing your neighbors may be helpful. If you had established relationships with those neighbors before, it might have been easier to share versus take, but maybe not. Again, we all sort of have to assess our personal situations and set our personal boundaries. But I do think we're all better off with some kind of community than we are on our own. Yes, CERT, CERT through your city. I think ours is through county. But maybe they also have city specific ones too. Okay. There's a lot of really good ideas here, like I said, and it seems to me like there is a lot of interest in a lot of people with a lot of stuff to share. And so I would encourage you guys to go ahead, and especially in like forward motion, because still coveting forward motion is basically for us to discuss not only the pandemic, but all sorts of these kinds of challenges that we face. So please feel free to bring up some of these issues and troubleshoot them together. We also do have now a specific group called Parenting Through This Pickle. It's not necessarily a COVID group, but it is for parents and how to sort of navigate these kind of crises and parenting questions with our kids. And so if you are in that situation where you have kids and want to commiserate with other parents and brainstorm, we have that group available as well. And so I think together we can put our heads together, and we are a lot of really, really smart, kind of forward-thinking people. Just those of us who are still protecting ourselves from the pandemic, I think, are sort of wired that way. And so I think it would be helpful if you guys are interested in sort of periodically revisiting these things and supporting each other. And if you want some focused interest groups, I know that, for example, like Gertie does a lot on like food prep and food storage. And so she would be a great resource. We could have some of those chats as well. So just keep us posted as to what you think might be useful or helpful, and we'll do this again sometime. All right.